The dark scrolls. The candle burns low, its flame bending beneath a draught that seems to breathe from another century. If one listens closely, beneath the hush of the wind and the creak of wood, there is the faint echo of bells, slow, deliberate, distant. They toll for souls long gone, yet never quite departed. Thus begins the night the Tudors called All Hallows Eve, the vigil of the dead, when the veil between worlds grew thin enough for whispers to pass through. In late October, England, the year uncertain, perhaps 1532, perhaps 1578, for the customs change little across the decades. The air smells of rain and smoke. The harvest has been brought in. The fields lie bare under a pale moon. And the kingdom, caught between the old faith and the new, trembles in quiet anticipation. The people still light their candles for the departed, even as reformers preach against superstition. They still bake their little round cakes, pressed with the mark of the cross, and send children out into the dark to trade prayer for bread. It is an act as old as memory and as forbidden as sin. Villages nestle in mist, their timber frames black against the night. Within each cottage, the hearth glows red, and shadows move along the walls like spirits at the edge of sight. Families gather to speak the names of those lost to plague, childbirth, or war. The dead, they believe, hear best when the world grows cold. A bowl of milk is left upon the doorstep, a chair drawn close to the fire for an unseen guest. To deny the dead a place among the living would be to invite misfortune. To remember them is to preserve the fragile order between realms. Scholars centuries later will argue whether these customs descend from the Celtic festival of Samhain, when the dying year was laid to rest, or whether they were born purely of Christian observance. But to the Tudor mind, such distinctions did not exist. Faith and fear were twined together, like smoke rising from damp wood. The church's liturgy for the faithful departed mingled easily with the villagers' older dread of wandering souls. In the eyes of London's bishops, it was heresy. In the eyes of the people, it was survival. Some chroniclers speak of men roaming the lanes wrapped in sheets, not as jest, but as warning. Each figure a reminder of death's nearness. Others describe children carrying turnips hollowed and carved with grim faces, a flickering candle inside to frighten away darker shapes. The light within the gourd was said to represent a trapped spirit seeking rest, or perhaps a soul in purgatory pleading for prayer. When the wind blew hard and the flame guttered out, the watchers crossed themselves, whispering that the soul had been claimed. Beyond the towns, on the high fields where the last stubble of wheat catches moonlight, bonfires are kindled. Their smoke curls toward the stars, carrying petitions for protection through the coming winter. Farmers cast handfuls of grain into the blaze, asking for mercy upon the next year's harvest. At the outermost ring of firelight stand those who do not belong entirely to either world: the healers, the midwives, the watchers of omens. They read the sparks for signs of who might live or die before spring. A spark that drifts eastward promises a wedding. One that falls into the ashes forebodes a grave. In manor houses, the rituals take a different form. The gentry, fearful of appearing rustic, yet no less bound to tradition, hold vigils in their private chapels. Servants file past the altar, each leaving a candle for a lost kin. In the great hall, platters of roasted fowl and cider steam upon oak tables, and yet no one eats until the chaplain has intoned the De Profundis. Out of the depths have I cried unto thee, O Lord. Only then do voices rise, cups are lifted, and the living feast in memory of the dead. Between toasts, stories are told, of soldiers who walked home years after they were slain, of mothers whose faces appeared in frost-rimmed windows. The company laughs, but their laughter falters before the winds moan in the chimney. Above all hovers the tension of belief. Henry VIII has broken with Rome, but the habits of 1,000 years do not vanish in a generation. The clergy who once blessed soul cakes now preach obedience to the crown, yet in secret they mutter the old prayers. Parish records note fines for those caught keeping the eve of All Hallows with lights and charms. Still the candles burn, tucked behind shutters. It is said that even the Queen, whether Catherine of Aragon or later Elizabeth herself, observed the season in her own fashion, ordering requiem masses not for popes but for princes, and for the idea of continuity in a world being rewritten. There are accounts, half rumor, half recollection, of monks wandering the countryside after their abbeys were dissolved, carrying with them relics and scraps of parchment. Some claim they offered blessings in exchange for food, others that they cursed the households that turned them away. In either telling, they became part of the knight's mythology, the last keepers of the old ways. When a traveller knocked upon a door on All Hallows' Eve, no one knew whether to offer bread or bar the latch. In the city, meanwhile, the mood is restless. London's narrow streets, slick with rain and refuse, echo with the tread of guardsmen enforcing curfew. Yet the people find ways to celebrate beneath the watchful eyes of authority. Apprentices parade with lanterns. Fishmongers hang garlands of withered herbs over their stalls. At St. Paul's churchyard, vendors whisper of charms, anise for protection, wormwood for the banishment of spectres. Somewhere near the Thames, a group of scholars debate whether spirits are vapors rising from graves or divine messengers sent to test faith. They drink until the argument dissolves into laughter, but each carries home a secret unease. It is within this atmosphere, a mixture of devotion, fear, and forbidden wonder, that the Tudor Halloween truly exists. No painted pumpkins, no paper masks, only the constant awareness that the world itself is fragile. To light a candle on All Hallows' Eve is to declare, however softly, that death has not conquered memory. The poorest peasant and the proudest noble are equal in that gesture. Later generations will find fragments of these practices in sermons, court records, and the marginalia of prayer books. They will puzzle over the meaning of souling songs, the verses sung by children who wandered from door to door. Soul, soul, for a soul cake. Pray you, good mistress, a soul cake. 1 for Peter, 2 for Paul, 3 for him who saved us all. Did the words conceal heresy or simple mercy? Historians will never agree. The parchment blots, the ink fades, and what remains is an echo. the sense of people standing between heaven and earth, trying to honor both. As midnight approaches, the bells toll again. A mist rises from the river and drifts across the fields. Dogs howl, and the watchers at the bonfire fall silent. Somewhere a door opens. A candle is set upon a windowsill. For a heartbeat the light wavers, then steadies, as though acknowledging a presence unseen. In that stillness lies the heart of Tudor England's Halloween. Not terror, not joy, but the solemn recognition that the dead are near, and that remembrance, however small, binds the living to eternity. The smoke from the last night's bonfire lingers into dawn, curling low across the stubbled fields like a ghost reluctant to leave. Dew glistens on the hedgerows, and the crows are restless, their cries harsh in the pale light. In every village, the signs of the vigil remain. Blackened stones, half-burned logs, the scent of ash mingled with apple wood. The people move quietly, as though not yet convinced that the night has ended. They sweep the hearths, gather the fragments of bread left for the dead, and whisper short prayers while the church bell calls for morning mass. All Hallows' Day has come, but its shadow, the eve, still clings to everything it touched. In a thatched cottage near Warwick, an old woman kneels by her oven, marking small circles of dough with a cross. Her hands are rough, her movements deliberate. She is baking soul cakes, round, sweet with spice, each one a token for a departed spirit. Children will come to her door before sunset, carrying lanterns carved from turnips, their faces hidden beneath rough masks of linen. For each cake they receive, they promise to say a prayer for the soul of the house's dead. It is an ancient exchange. Food for remembrance, charity for salvation. The practice itself is older than the kingdom that surrounds it. To the reformers, it reeks of popery, indulgences dressed in sugar and wheat. Yet to the villagers, it is no more sinful than kindness. Bread has always been the language of faith. The woman hums as she works, unaware that she is keeping alive something far older than the church's decrees, older even than Rome's empire. The idea that the dead depend on the living for memory, and the living depend on the dead for peace. Across the countryside, bonfires are being rekindled, not for warmth but for protection. Each parish has its chosen hill, a mound or clearing where people gather after dusk. They call these fires the Hallows Lights, though in older tongues they were known as Samhain blazes. The boundary between the names is thin as the veil they are meant to guard. Into the flames go herbs for blessing, rosemary for remembrance, sage for cleansing, juniper to ward off the restless. Farmers add bones of slaughtered livestock, believing the crackle pleases unseen guardians of the herds. The fires roar, sparks spiraling into the cold sky, a defiance against the encroaching dark. Men circle the blaze, faces ruddy in the glow, while women chant softly, or toss handfuls of salt into the flames to test fortune. If the salt burns bright and clear, the household will prosper. If it hisses and dies, famine may follow. Somewhere beyond the firelight, musicians play a slow air on pipes and drums, a rhythm that seems to come from the earth itself. The people dance, not in revelry but in reverence, tracing the same spirals their ancestors drew on stone. It is said that on this night the invisible passes among them. Some swear they see shapes moving at the edge of the fields. Others hear footsteps on the road where none should be. Yet the fear is tempered by a strange comfort. These are not demons, but kin, lingering for one more glimpse of the world. In the crowd, a young boy holds his mother's hand and asks if his father, lost to fever the previous winter, might be watching. She tells him perhaps he is, if they keep the fire burning bright enough to guide him home. Inside the churches, the tone is different. The clergy perform the solemn masses of All Souls, chanting Latin verses that half the congregation no longer understands. The reformers among them frown, insisting that such prayers cannot release souls from purgatory, a place they deny exists. Yet even they lower their voices when the organ fades, as if unsure whether unbelief itself might summon something worse than faith. The Reformation has divided the land, but death remains a common tongue. There are stories from the north, from Yorkshire and Durham, where the people still carry out the souling plays, small performances enacted by masked villagers. Each play tells of a traveler's death, his plea for prayers, and his resurrection through charity. The actors wear bells at their ankles and sing in rough harmony. It is entertainment, yes, but also theology made visible. Those who watch toss coins or bread to the players, as though buying indulgence for themselves. When questioned by magistrates, they claim it is only a game, but their eyes tell another story. Scholars writing centuries later will puzzle over these rituals, debating whether they descend from the Gaelic Samhain or the Roman Feralia. The truth is more complex. Traditions drift like smoke, mingling and reforming with each age. What matters is not origin, but endurance. In the Tudor countryside, survival often meant compromise. The same hands that built the parish church also carved talismans against witches. The same lips that recited the Pater Noster also whispered charms over the sick. In this fragile balance of faith and fear, the bonfire becomes a symbol of continuity. Long after the priests withdraw, the flames remain, tended by those who do not question their purpose. When the night deepens, the watchers cast their gaze into the heart of the blaze, searching for omens. A rising column of smoke that bends eastward foretells a prosperous winter. If it leans west, storms will come. If the sparks fall like rain, a soul has found rest. If the fire hisses and spits, a restless spirit lingers near. Not far from Windsor, at one of the royal manors, the court observes the vigil in a manner both grand and cautious. The king's chaplains forbid public superstition, yet they cannot erase the customs of the household. In the great kitchen, cooks prepare their own soul cakes, embossed with the Tudor rose instead of a cross. Pages distribute them to servants who light candles in the gallery. It is said that even Henry himself, though he mocks the monks of Rome, keeps one small taper burning in the chapel for his ancestors. Whether out of piety or fear, no one can say. Later, under Elizabeth's reign, the ritual becomes quieter but no less resonant. The Queen's astrologers note that the night of All Hallows coincides with certain ominous alignments of stars. Elizabeth, ever mindful of signs, allows the court to keep its watch. Courtiers appear in masquerade, half serious, half mocking. Angels in gilt armor, devils in black velvet. Music echoes through the palace halls, mingling with the drone of psalms. The line between celebration and ceremony blurs. Some call it theater. Others call it devotion. Beyond the palace walls, the common people imitate what they glimpse from afar. Children don rough costumes from scraps of cloth and follow the glow of torches from house to house. Soul, soul, for a soul cake, they cry, their breath visible in the chill air. Housewives drop small loaves into their baskets. At each doorway, the children recite prayers for the departed, real or imagined, before vanishing again into the dark. To the listeners behind shuttered windows, their voices sound like the echo of an older world refusing to fade. As midnight draws near, the fires on the hillsides burn lower. The dancers grow weary, their songs trailing into silence. One by one, they toss embers into the air, murmuring names. A grandfather, a stillborn child, a lover lost at sea. Each name rises in smoke, invisible yet felt. The final act is always the same. The youngest child present carries a brand from the dying fire back to his family's hearth. That coal will kindle the next day's flame, binding the household to the wider mystery. To let the fire die completely is to risk misfortune, for warmth itself is a form of remembrance. What outsiders might call superstition, the Tudors understood as necessity. The world beyond their doors was uncertain. Plague in summer, famine in winter, war at the borders, heresy at home. Against such forces, ceremony offered a fragile kind of order. To bake a cake for the dead or light a candle on the window was not rebellion but endurance, an assertion that the soul mattered in a time when life was cheap. And yet, behind the comfort lurked fear. There were whispers of those who misused the night, of charmers who invoked spirits not for blessing but for knowledge. In the marshes of East Anglia, it was said, certain women gathered herbs by moonlight and muttered to unseen companions. The authorities called them witches, though few could prove what they did. Still, the coincidence of their gatherings with the fires of All Hallows fed suspicion. By the next century, these whispers would erupt into trials and pyres. But for now they remain rumors, drifting like the smoke, ominous, unresolved. As dawn approaches, frost settles upon the ashes of the bonfire. The fields glimmer silver, and the first church bells of All Saints' Day begin to ring. The people return to their homes, carrying with them the warmth of the night. The fires die, the soul cakes are eaten, the prayers whispered. And yet, something lingers. Beneath the soil, beneath the memory of law and sermon, the pulse of older faiths still beats. The Tudors may believe themselves modern, but in their hearts they live in two ages at once, one facing toward the eternal city of God, the other toward the endless forest of their ancestors. In that duality lies the power of their Halloween. It is not a holiday of fright, but of continuity, a ritual acknowledgement that death is only another province of the same kingdom. Whether the king wears a crown or a mask, whether the peasant's candle burns in a window or in secret, each flame speaks the same wordless plea. Remember us, so that we may remember you. By the time the sun climbs over the hedgerows, the traces of the vigil are almost gone. Smoke drifts upward in thin, fading lines. The boy who asked for his father's return finds only the warmth of ashes where the fire once glowed. But he smiles, certain that, somewhere beyond sight, his father has seen the light, and knows he was not forgotten. The world of Tudor England turns onward, weary, faithful, and haunted, carrying its mixture of prayer and superstition into the uncertain years ahead. And though kings will rise and fall, though churches will burn and be rebuilt, the memory of that night, when the living dared to speak to the dead through bread and flame, will endure far longer than any crown. Within the thick stone walls of England's royal palaces, the scent of October is fainter, replaced by wax, wine, and the cold of marble floors. Yet even here, among gilded ceilings and painted heraldry, the shadow of All Hallows' Eve lingers. The Tudors, for all their majesty, are children of the same age as the peasants who dance around village fires. Their palaces are larger hearths, their fears grander, their rituals veiled in silk rather than ash. As evening gathers over Hampton Court, the courtiers move like actors preparing for a mystery play. Servants glide through corridors carrying candles, their flames reflected in the polished armor that lines the gallery. The light trembles over tapestries depicting battles of saints and monsters, images that seem to stir in the flicker. At the chapel door, a group of choristers rehearses Miserere Mei Deus, their voices rising into the vaulted gloom. It is not officially a mass for the dead. Such things have fallen under suspicion. Yet the tones of mourning cannot be erased from the music. In the great hall, long tables have been set with pewter dishes and folded linens embroidered with the royal cipher. The air smells of roasted meat, cinnamon, and the faint tang of burning resin. At the high table sits the king, flanked by lords and ambassadors, his expression unreadable beneath the shifting glow of torches. Henry, now heavy with age and pride, keeps his own counsel this night. He claims disdain for the superstitions of the old church, yet his gaze drifts often toward the darkened corners, as though seeking the ghosts of those he has cast aside. A wife, a friend, a loyal servant executed for treason that may never have existed. The courtiers speak in low voices of politics and war, but underneath runs another current, the awareness that this night, by ancient reckoning, belongs not to the living. When the king lifts his goblet, the room falls silent. To the memory of England's forefathers, he declares. The toast is secular enough to pass the scrutiny of reformers, yet every head bows a moment longer than protocol demands. The memory of the dead cannot be outlawed, only renamed. After the meal, the hall is cleared for entertainment. Minstrels enter, followed by players masked in white and black. They perform a short allegory, the triumph of virtue over death, ending with a figure robed as an angel scattering petals from a silver bowl. The courtiers applaud politely, yet some glance uneasily at the lingering petals, which look too much like ashes. In a side chamber beyond the hall, the Queen and her ladies keep a quieter vigil. Whether it is Catherine of Aragon or Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour or the daughter who will one day rule in her father's stead, the ritual is the same. A circle of women around a small altar, candles burning before icons hastily hidden during the day. They pray in whispers, their Latin imperfect but heartfelt. For them, All Hallows is not merely custom, it is refuge. The crown may change its creed, but a mother's need to pray for her dead children endures beyond decrees. As the hours pass, the revelry in the hall fades into subdued conversation. The courtiers disperse, leaving behind the echo of music and the smell of wine. Somewhere deep within the palace, in a private oratory lined with carved oak, a priest recites the office of the dead by memory, the book long since confiscated. The words fall softly into the candlelight. Requiem aeternam dona eis, Domine, a single voice in defiance of silence. The court chroniclers record none of this, yet traces survive in letters, marginal notes, and confessions whispered to spies. A lady-in-waiting to Anne Boleyn once wrote of seeing a procession of servants walking the galleries after midnight, each carrying a candle for a lost soul of the household. When questioned, they swore it was only to test for drafts. But the Queen herself, curious or perhaps moved, followed them, and later confessed to her chaplain that she had felt a presence, neither fearful nor benign, but expectant. Such moments blur the boundary between pageantry and penance. The Tudors believed themselves chosen by Providence, yet haunted by guilt, the price of power seized by blood. The Reformation has torn apart the chain of intercession between earth and heaven. What remains is uncertainty. If the dead cannot be prayed for, what becomes of them? And if the living cease to remember, what becomes of the living? These questions linger beneath every candle-lit feast and every trembling hymn. By Elizabeth's reign, the spectacle becomes subtler, but the essence endures. The Queen, though publicly aloof from superstition, understands the theatre of belief. On the eve of All Saints, she orders the chapel draped in black and gold, the candles doubled, the musicians instructed to play solemn airs. No masses are said for souls that would betray her Protestant faith, but she commands that psalms be sung for the comfort of the faithful departed. The words change, the intention does not. Those who attend the Queen's private vigils speak of a peculiar atmosphere, the air heavy with perfume and incense, the flicker of so many flames reflecting in her jeweled collar. Elizabeth sits motionless, her face pale beneath the paint, her eyes fixed on the crucifix that hangs above the altar, a relic she refuses to remove despite the objections of her advisers. When the music ceases, she rises and speaks softly. The dead are England too. No one answers. The words are neither Catholic nor heretical, merely true. Outside the palace, London mirrors its monarch. The nobility host masked banquets where guests dress as saints or spirits. Poets compose verses about the transience of life. Painters depict vanitas scenes, skulls beside roses, hourglasses beside feasts. Death becomes fashionable, a subject for contemplation rather than fear. Yet in the poorer quarters, the old customs persist. Apprentices light lanterns shaped like skulls. Sailors toss bread into the Thames for the drowned. Between opulence and poverty, a single thread connects them: remembrance as performance. Among the scholars of the Queen's court are men who attempt to reconcile faith and folklore with reason. They collect accounts of apparitions, note the behavior of lights over marshes, and speculate about vapors and humors. One such thinker, a physician to the court, writes that the appearance of spirits on All Hallows' Eve may be a natural exhalation of the earth's melancholy, ignited by the night's humidity. Yet he admits, almost reluctantly, that science cannot extinguish what the heart perceives. The eyes deceive, he concludes, but the fear is genuine. It is this paradox, the coexistence of belief and doubt, that defines the Tudor soul. Their Halloween is neither pagan festival nor Christian feast, but something suspended between, an act of remembering, performed by a people unsure of whom they may safely remember. In every prayer, there is a shadow of heresy. In every denial, a whisper of faith. As the century wanes, England itself seems haunted. The plague returns in waves, the sea brings rumors of invasion, and the gallows claim heretics of both creeds. Against this backdrop, the rituals of All Hallows take on new urgency. To light a candle becomes an act of resistance, a small flame of continuity amid the tempests of doctrine. In 1601, an aging courtier writes in his diary of attending one final vigil at Whitehall. The Queen, now frail and withdrawn, insists upon the old music, the same miserere once sung in her father's time. The courtiers kneel, the air thick with the scent of beeswax and myrrh. As the last note fades, Elizabeth whispers that she dreams often of her father and of the tower where her mother's ghost walks. "They visit me kindly," she says, "as if to remind me that I, too, shall soon be history." The courtier records this without comment. Within 2 years, she is dead, and the bells of All Hallows ring over a new monarch. The Stuart age will inherit the customs, but not the faith. What had once been sacred becomes story. What was once story becomes superstition. Yet the trace of Tudor reverence lingers in the English imagination, a mixture of solemnity and fear, of ritual and spectacle. The banquets, the masks, the secret prayers whispered by queens, all become the seeds from which later centuries will grow their ghost tales and midnight festivals. In the great silence after Elizabeth's passing, the palace itself seems to remember. Servants report strange sounds in the gallery, a faint rustle of silk, a whisper of Latin hymns long forbidden. The chroniclers dismiss it as wind, but those who were present that last All Hallows night know better. They had seen the Queen's candle burning alone in the chapel, the flame trembling as if stirred by an unseen breath. To step back through the halls now, centuries later, is to walk through layers of time. The plaster hides scorch marks from ancient torches. Beneath the floorboards, fragments of candle wax cling to the stone. Each mark is a relic of a night when the powerful, like the humble, sought to make peace with the unseen. History records their decrees and battles, but not their whispers. Yet it is in those whispers that the soul of the Tudor world endures, a world poised forever between salvation and superstition, between the flicker of faith and the shadow of fear. And so, in the grand palaces of England, the Feast of All Hallows is both pageant and confession, a mirror held to a kingdom that sees its own mortality reflected back. The monarchs may dine beneath gilded ceilings, but the candlelight that warms them is the same that flickers in the cottages of their subjects. It is the same light that once burned beside village fires, that still burns in memory wherever the dead are named. For in Tudor England, the boundary between power and ghosthood is perilously thin. Every throne, however splendid, stands atop bones. Every crown, however bright, casts its own shadow on the soul. And every All Hallows Eve, when the bells toll through the fog and the torches flare against the wind, the past stirs once more, not to frighten, but to remind. The dead, after all, have never left England. They are merely waiting for the living to remember their names. The century turns, and the fires of faith that once burned openly are now banked beneath ash. The Reformation has remade England's conscience, but not its memory. In churches stripped of their icons, the air still carries the scent of candles once lit for the dead. The walls, whitewashed and bare, conceal the faint outlines of saints that no lime can erase. A new age has begun, one of surveillance and silence, where belief survives only in whispers. It is the early years of James I, though the wound of Tudor division has not yet healed. The crown has changed, but the old ghosts remain. Sermons thunder against popish relics, and bishops proclaim that prayers for the dead are heresy, that the soul's fate is sealed at death and cannot be altered by human intercession. Yet in the villages, far from London's eyes, the people continue to keep their vigil. They no longer call it All Hallows Eve. They speak of it as the Old Night, or simply the Turning. As autumn deepens, the rituals adapt. Candles are hidden behind shutters, prayers disguised as lullabies. Soul cakes give way to plain loaves, unblessed but still offered. The parish constables patrol the lanes, alert for gatherings, but they cannot extinguish what lives in the human heart. In barns and cellars, families whisper the names of their dead. The words are soft, almost indistinguishable from breathing. Yet each syllable carries the weight of rebellion. In certain towns, the clergy seek to reclaim the night by replacing old customs with new lessons. Children are told that the dead cannot return, that the bonfires are to celebrate deliverance from sin, not communion with spirits. The scholars call it reformation of manners. But beneath their moral sermons lies a quiet unease. For every law that forbids enchantment, every proclamation against the old rites, seems to summon them back into being. It is in this atmosphere of tension that another kind of darkness begins to grow. One born not of the grave, but of fear. In the border counties, tales spread of witches gathering on the night once dedicated to the dead. The same fires that once signified protection are said now to summon the devil. The women who once kept the hearths, who read the smoke and soot for signs of fate, are accused of consorting with spirits. The night of remembrance becomes a night of accusation. In Lancaster, a widow named Anne Whittle is said to have been seen lighting a candle on All Hallows Eve and speaking to the air. When questioned, she answers that she prayed for her husband's soul. Her interrogators record another story, that she called upon him to aid her in vengeance. Her words, shaped by grief and faith, are twisted into proof of witchcraft. She is imprisoned through winter and dies before spring, her body buried in unconsecrated ground. Such stories multiply. The boundary between saint and sorcerer, once blurred by ritual, now becomes a line of death. To remember one's dead is to invite suspicion. To forget them is to betray love. Caught between faith and fear, the people invent new disguises. They speak of fortune-telling rather than prophecy, of lighting fires for warmth rather than for prayer. Yet the pattern remains. Light against darkness, bread against hunger, names against oblivion. Meanwhile, the scholars of the New Order write of Halloween as a heathen survival. They declare that its ceremonies were never Christian at all, but remnants of pagan superstition. It is safer to call the past barbarous than to admit its persistence. But the records of local courts, the fragments of household diaries, reveal another truth. They show a people who, though forbidden the language of faith, continue to translate it into daily life. A candle left at the window for a traveler becomes a candle for the departed. A toast to health becomes a prayer for the soul. The gesture changes, not the intent. Even within the higher ranks, echoes of the old feast linger. In the country manners of former courtiers, dinners on the eve of All Saints still include a vacant chair at table, left for providence or fortune, but known in the heart to belong to the dead. Wine is poured silently into the earth before the first toast. No one speaks of it, yet no one forgets. In their silence, they preserve what decrees cannot kill. The Church, unable to stamp out memory entirely, seeks to redefine it. The festival of All Hallows is officially replaced by public days of Thanksgiving, the victory over Spain, the foiling of conspiracies, the king's deliverance. Fireworks replace bonfires, sermons replace prayers. The old flames are turned toward politics. But even these new spectacles borrow from the same instinct, the need to confront darkness with light, to gather together in the face of fear. The people cheer the king's safety, yet their faces, illuminated by sparks, resemble those of their ancestors around the Samhain fire. History, it seems, knows only how to change costumes. In the borderlands of Scotland and northern England, where the church's reach is weaker, the ancient customs endure more openly. There, the peasants speak of the seining fire, a purifying flame carried from field to field on All Hallows Eve. They mark their doorposts with its smoke, drive cattle through the embers for protection, and tell stories of spirits walking in peace, not malice. To the outsiders, these rites are barbaric. To those who keep them, they are the pulse of the earth itself. The old and new faiths coexist, neither triumphant nor extinguished, two mirrors reflecting the same uncertain light. Back in London, pamphleteers rail against such practices, branding them the work of ignorance. One writes that the devil hath donned the vestments of popery and the mask of rustic mirth. Yet these same men, when the plague revisits the city, are seen lighting candles at crossroads and muttering charms. Fear erodes conviction faster than doctrine. When death once more walks the streets, the distinctions between superstition and prayer vanish like breath in frost. In the homes of recusants, those who refuse to renounce the old faith, the vigil of All Hallows continues in secret. Families gather in shuttered rooms, the sound of soldiers' boots echoing in the distance. A crucifix, hidden behind a tapestry, is brought forth. They kneel, whispering the names of martyrs and kin. A loaf of bread and a cup of wine stand upon the table, unblessed but sacred in intent. One child keeps watch at the window, ready to snuff the candle should a stranger approach. In such fragile moments, belief becomes resistance. There are reports of strange lights seen in the countryside on those nights, wandering flames drifting over marshes and moors. Scholars call them will-o'-the-wisps, tricks of gas and decay. But to the villagers, they are the souls of those denied rest, still seeking prayers that can no longer be spoken aloud. People toss crumbs or whisper blessings as the lights pass. No one admits it in daylight, but everyone has done it. By the late 16th century, England stands divided between two ghosts, the ghost of the old religion and the ghost of its denial. The night once given to communion between living and dead becomes a mirror of the nation's conscience. Every household hides its own heresy, every conscience its own ghost. The fires of Samhain have become the embers of memory, glowing beneath the ash of law. And yet, out of repression, new traditions arise. In certain villages, the youth, forbidden to keep the old vigil, invent their own mischief. They roam from house to house in disguise, demanding food or ale, threatening harmless pranks if refused. Solars become geysers, their prayers turn to jest. The sacred exchange of cakes and blessings transforms into the beginnings of play. Behind the laughter, though, lingers the echo of older voices. The same bargain between generosity and protection, mercy and mischief. It is a quiet irony that in trying to erase the old rites, the authorities give birth to something enduring. The children's revels survive where the church's prayers cannot. By the time the 17th century dawns, the night of All Hallows has become both less holy and more human. It belongs to no creed, yet carries traces of all. In hidden chapels and secret glens, in the kitchens of nobles and the huts of peasants, the same candles still burn. They burn not for doctrine, but for memory itself. The belief that to remember is to resist erasure. The law may forbid masses for the dead, but it cannot forbid the love that keeps their names alive. As autumn gives way to winter, the fields grow silent, the rivers harden, and England sleeps beneath frost. But beneath that sleep lies endurance, the quiet pulse of a people who, though torn between heaven and crown, still find meaning in the act of lighting a single flame against the dark. Centuries later, when historians trace the lineage of Halloween, they will find in this age of suppression the seeds of transformation. What was once prayer becomes play. What was once heresy becomes folklore, and what was once feared becomes celebrated. Yet behind every pumpkin lantern and masquerade lies this older story, of faith disguised, of memory surviving by adaptation. For in the end, the soul of All Hallows Eve, like the souls it honors, cannot be destroyed, only hidden, only waiting. And when the wind rises over the empty fields, carrying the faint scent of smoke and apples, it is as if the lost voices of Tudor England still murmur through the mist. We are not gone. We are only waiting for the fire to be lit again. The wind that once carried prayers across Tudor fields now crosses oceans. With it go the remnants of a nation's conscience, the songs of souling children, the memory of fires on hilltops, the habit of leaving bread for unseen guests. When the 17th century dawns, England begins to scatter itself across the seas, and in the holds of its ships travel more than colonists. They carry ghosts. The Puritans who settled the New World flee the corruption of old Europe, but they cannot flee the calendar that lives inside them. In their stern theology, every feast is suspect, every superstition an open gate to sin. All Hallows Eve, with its masks and candles, is forbidden. Yet even they, on certain autumn nights, pause when the wind howls through the trees, remembering what they have tried to forget. Some still mutter that the night between October and November belongs to the borderland of souls, though they name it no longer. Further north, among the Scotch-Irish and Border English who arrive later, the memory endures more boldly. They bring with them fragments of the old rites, stories of wandering spirits, customs of fortune-telling, songs half sacred and half playful. In the raw wilderness of America, where death is once again an everyday companion, these memories find new soil. The bonfire becomes a signal against the encroaching dark, a reminder that even in exile, the living may summon warmth from memory. For a time, these scattered rituals remain private, whispered, domestic, without name. But in the long winter nights of the colonies, when isolation presses against the walls and the forest seems alive with unseen eyes, people begin to gather again, as their ancestors once did. They tell stories. They light candles in hollowed turnips or gourds, the nearest thing to the English lanterns of old. They carve faces, not to mock the dead, but to remember them. Each flame becomes a fragile echo of home. As generations pass, the religious strictures soften. The old calendar festivals return, in altered form, dressed in the manners of the new world. Harvest suppers and autumn revels replace the feasts of saints. Masquerades replace processions. Yet beneath these new garments, the pulse of All Hallows beats steadily. The soul cakes of Tudor England become American pumpkin pies. The bonfires of Samhain are reborn as communal gatherings around hearth and harvest table. By the 18th century, the transformation is nearly complete. The night is no longer one of prayer, but of storytelling. In small towns and frontier settlements, neighbors gather by lamplight to tell tales of ghosts, witches, and wandering lights. Echoes of the same stories once told beside the Tudor hearth. Fear becomes entertainment. Remembrance becomes tradition. Yet those who listen closely sense something older beneath the laughter. A hush when the wind rises, a glance toward the door left slightly ajar. The living still expect company. The Enlightenment, with its devotion to reason, tries to banish such shadows, declaring that superstition has no place in the modern world. But belief, like the dead, does not vanish. It changes form. The language of spirits becomes the language of folklore, and the scholars who once burned charms now collect them in books. In rural England, antiquarians begin to document the fading customs of All Hallows, not to suppress them, but to preserve them. They describe children souling for cakes, farmers lighting protective fires, families keeping vigil for their dead. The age of faith becomes the age of record, and through ink, the ghosts find new life. Across the Atlantic, the young nation of America becomes a crucible of these inherited fragments. From Ireland come the tales of jack-o'-lanterns and wandering lights. From Scotland, the games of disguise and divination. From England, the songs and harvest fires. The melting of these traditions creates something both old and new, a night neither wholly sacred nor profane, when the boundaries of identity blur as easily as those between life and death. In the 19th century, the migration surges. The famine drives thousands from Ireland's shores, carrying with them the lore of Samhain and its mischievous spirits. In the crowded streets of New York and Boston, children carve pumpkins, easier to hollow than turnips, and carry them through the fog, their faces flickering orange against the dark. Adults smile, unaware that they are witnessing the rebirth of a millennium-old ritual. The word Halloween, shortened from All Hallows Eve, appears in print, stripped of its theology but rich in its inheritance. Yet even in this new, bustling world, the night retains its old duality. Ministers preach against its revels, calling them vestiges of paganism, while poets and storytellers embrace its mystery. Washington Irving writes of phantom horsemen and haunted glens. Later, others imagine the dead returning, not for judgment, but for memory's sake. Halloween becomes a mirror, reflecting the same question the Tudors once whispered. What separates the living from the dead? And what duty does one owe to both? As industry rises and cities glow with artificial light, the bonfire's necessity fades, but its symbolism persists. Communities organize lantern parades. Schools host masquerades where children dress as angels, devils, kings, and queens. The same archetypes that once filled the halls of Tudor palaces. The old tension between virtue and vice becomes theater again. What was once forbidden magic becomes sanctioned play. In time, the practice of souling, the humble exchange of cake for prayer, evolves into something new. Children, masked and laughing, go door to door, demanding sweets not for souls, but for sport. Trick or treat, they say, echoing unconsciously the ancient bargain. Generosity in exchange for peace. The form has changed, but the impulse is unchanged. A small ceremony of exchange between strangers. A reaffirmation that kindness guards against mischief, as prayer once guarded against fear. Modern eyes see in Halloween a carnival of darkness, skeletons, ghosts, the grotesque. But beneath the spectacle lies a memory far more tender. The act of remembering that life and death are neighbors. The jack-o'-lantern on a suburban porch is a descendant of the Tudor candle set on the windowsill. The laughter of children in costume is the echo of those who once sang through England's mist for soul cakes. What began as faith has become folklore, and what was once persecution has become celebration. Yet something of the old reverence endures, hidden beneath the plastic masks and electric lights. There is still a moment late at night when the street's empty and the candles flicker low, when the air feels heavy with presence. The revelers have gone home, but the silence that follows feels ancient, familiar, as though the world pauses to listen. It is then that the lineage of the night reveals itself. From the bonfires of the Celts to the prayers of the Tudors, from the secret candles of recusants to the carved pumpkins of America. Each generation, knowingly or not, adds its own flame to the same enduring fire. If one could peel back the centuries, the sight would be continuous. An unbroken chain of light stretching through time, villagers casting grain into fire, queens kneeling before hidden altars, children carrying lanterns through mist, families in a distant land setting pumpkins aglow. The costumes, the songs, the languages change, but the gesture remains constant, a hand offering warmth against the dark. A voice calling the names of those who came before. Historians debate where Halloween truly begins, in the Celtic hills, in the Roman feast, in the medieval church, or in the Tudor conscience. The truth, perhaps, is that it begins wherever human beings fear forgetting and choose remembrance over silence. The Tudors, caught between worlds, gave shape to that impulse. Their uneasy faith carved the pattern the world still follows. Now, centuries later, when autumn returns and the light dwindles, the same questions rise anew. Why do we light candles in hollowed gourds? Why do we disguise ourselves in faces not our own? Why do we feast when the year is dying? Perhaps it is because somewhere deep within us lingers that old Tudor understanding that the dead are not gone, merely waiting for acknowledgement. To celebrate Halloween is to perform, in jest and joy, what the Tudors once performed in prayer: to remember, to appease, to belong. And if on that night the air grows still, and the wind carries the faint toll of a bell, it may not be imagination. It may be the echo of All Hallows' Eve as it was once kept, when England knelt between faiths, when the living spoke softly to their dead, and when every candle that flickered in the fog was a promise that memory, like flame, must never be allowed to die. The world has changed beyond what any Tudor could imagine, yet the rhythm of October endures. The harvest, the decay, the gathering of families, the quiet acknowledgement of mortality, all return, year after year, wearing new faces but speaking the same language. Halloween, stripped of dogma, remains what it has always been: a night of recognition. So when the jack-o'-lantern glows on a modern doorstep and a child's laughter drifts down the street, remember that the same light once burned in a thatched cottage under a gray Tudor sky. Remember the hands that kneaded soul cakes, the voices that prayed in secret, the fires that defied the dark. Remember that in every shadow of this night lives the reflection of all who came before. The past does not vanish. It changes shape. It waits at the window like a candle behind glass, steady and small, but enough to guide the way home. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more.